After years of low inflation, inflation in Europe has gone through the roof. Germany is experiencing the highest inflation in 70 years. In June 2021, inflation in the European Union was still close to 2%. In August 2022, it was above 10% in the EU as a whole. But that number hides a remarkable divergence between countries. In Estonia, inflation reached a stunning 25% in August 2022. In France, it was 6.6%. And in Switzerland, not an EU member state, inflation was just 3.3%. A year before, in June 2021, inflation was very close to 2% in most European countries. With 5.3%, Hungary had the highest inflation. Portugal had the lowest inflation, at minus 0.6%. In this video, we'll look at the change of inflation in 31 countries, the 27 member states of the EU, and the United Kingdom, Norway, Switzerland, and Iceland. How can we explain the dramatic, uneven rise in inflation? Consumers are paying a lot more for energy than they used to. Companies are also facing higher energy bills, which has an impact on the price of their goods and services. But energy prices are set on international markets. Why doesn't the expensive energy result in a similar rise of inflation across the continent? As this figure shows, there's a strong correlation between the rise of inflation and the ratio of national energy use to GDP. As a general rule, the more energy a country needs to produce a dollar of economic output, the higher its inflation. Countries in Central and Eastern Europe have higher energy intensities and higher inflation rates than their Western European neighbors. Countries with a lower GDP per capita tend to be more energy intensive, so it's not surprising that Central and Eastern European countries, who are relatively poor, are experiencing higher inflation than the West. But it's not just an East-West story. Even within regions with similar GDP per capita, the more energy-intensive countries experience higher inflation. For example, Central Europe, Southern Europe, and the Baltics. What's going on in Iceland? Iceland is a rich country with an abnormally high energy use. Why doesn't this result in much higher inflation? Although Iceland is a small nation, it's a big producer of aluminum. Making aluminum requires a lot of electricity, but all of Iceland's electricity is generated from renewable sources. So the Icelandic economy is less affected by higher fossil fuel prices than the rest of Europe. What other factors could contribute to the rise of inflation? According to economic theory, when unemployment is too low, workers demand higher wages, and higher wages lead to higher prices. However, there is no correlation between unemployment and the change of inflation in Europe. Inflation rose more in Spain and Greece than it did in Germany, although the German unemployment rate is much lower. Do deficits cause inflation? It makes intuitive sense that if the government spends more money into the economy than it taxes away, this deficit will lead to inflation. However, there is no correlation between government deficits and the rise in inflation. Denmark and the UK have the same change in inflation, although the Danish government ran a budget surplus in 2021, while the British had an 8.1% deficit. Finland and Estonia had similar deficits, but their inflation numbers are very different. What about public debt? Maybe governments choose to inflate away the debt. However, there's a slightly negative relation between government debt and inflation. Greece, with its massive government debt, has experienced a smaller rise in inflation than the Baltic countries, where government debt is very low. Estonia has both the lowest government debt to GDP and the highest inflation in all of Europe. Inflation is higher in the Netherlands than it is in Italy, although Italy's debt to GDP ratio is almost 100 percentage points higher. Central bankers try to control inflation by changing interest rates. By influencing how expensive it is to borrow money, they influence prices of goods and services. The picture shows central bank policy rates on the 1st of June 2022. Since that time, central banks have raised interest rates in an attempt to tamp down inflation. But it's not clear that interest rates have an effect on Europe's inflation. In the euro area, where the ECB sets monetary policy for all 17 member states, inflation rose by 4.7% in France and 21.5% in Estonia. In Slovakia, a country with a negative interest rate, the rise in inflation is similar to neighboring Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland, where policy rates were over 5%. In conclusion, Europe's worst inflation in generations is driven by energy. Conventional factors monitored by central banks don't seem to play a role. If you're interested in banks or central banks, please like and subscribe to my channel. If you want to learn more about this research, you can mail me at jan.muschot@finrestra.com.